Emma Walsh had waited her entire life for the moment she would be truly seen. Not for her appearance, which she deliberately kept unremarkable, but for what she could do with a rifle in her hands from distances that made most soldiers question the laws of physics. For 12 years, she'd been a ghost in the U.S. Army's classified sniper program, moving through war zones like a whisper, leaving nothing behind but precision results in impossible shot records no one was allowed to discuss. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains of northeastern Afghanistan stretched before her like a crumpled sheet, ridges and valleys cast in predawn shadows as Emma adjusted her position on the narrow ledge. Her ghillie suit blended perfectly with the rocky terrain, making her invisible to anyone scanning the ridgeline. From her position at 9,780 feet, she commanded a view of the entire valley where, according to intelligence, a ranger team had been compromised during a high-value target extraction. Emma's formal designation was Overwatch Specialist, a deliberately vague title that obscured her real purpose. She was part of a classified program known only to generals with stars enough to bend light, where female snipers were deployed for missions requiring extended isolation and extraordinary patience. The program existed because someone at the Pentagon had recognized a simple truth: in certain environments, women were physiologically better suited for the demands of extreme long-range shooting. Through her Leupold Mark V scope, Emma scanned the valley floor, meticulously identifying terrain features that would affect her shots. The barometric pressure, temperature, humidity, all variables she'd been calculating since arriving at her position 6 hours earlier. Her custom-built Macmillan TAC-338 rifle was practically an extension of her body, the stock shaped specifically to her frame, barrel harmonics tuned to her particular ammunition loads. "Overwatch, this is Granite 6, a voice crackled through her earpiece. "We are pinned down at grid coordinates Echo 7903. Multiple hostiles, heavy weapons. Need immediate assistance." Emma keyed her throat mic. "Granite 6, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on your position. Count? 14 confirmed hostiles using the ridgeline for cover. 2 more in the abandoned structure north of our position. They have us bracketed." She took a slow, deliberate breath. At 2,500 yards, nearly a mile and a half, this wasn't just shooting, it was solving complex physics equations while the variables changed in real time. Wind speed shifting between the ridges. Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation. Light refraction through varying air densities. Most military snipers weren't even qualified beyond 1,000 yards. "Granite 6, I'm preparing to engage. Mark your position." A small infrared strobe flashed in her scope, invisible to the naked eye but clear through her optics. Emma's mind entered the state her instructors had called combat meditation, where every external distraction faded away. There was only the shot, the space between heartbeats, and the absolute certainty of what would happen when she squeezed the trigger. Her first target was the most immediate threat, a fighter with an RPG preparing to fire on the ranger's position. Emma exhaled half a breath, held, and squeezed. The TAC-338 bucked against her shoulder. 7 seconds later, the figure crumpled. Before anyone in the valley could process what had happened, Emma had already cycled her bolt and acquired her second target. Another shot. Another hit. By her third shot, the hostiles had realized they were under fire but couldn't locate the source. The suppressed rifle's report was lost in the mountain acoustics, and the extreme range meant the bullet arrived long before any sound could reach them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What happened next would later be described in classified after-action reports as the most extraordinary display of precision shooting in modern combat history. Over the next 11 minutes, Emma systematically eliminated all 16 hostiles, each shot requiring recalculation for changing conditions, each hitting with lethal precision at a distance most experienced snipers would consider impossible. The Rangers watched in stunned silence as their ambushers fell one after another, as though struck by an invisible force. There were no near misses, no warning shots, just the clinical efficiency of someone who had spent thousands of hours mastering her craft beyond what anyone thought possible. Overwatch, came the voice of the Ranger team leader, a mixture of awe and professional respect in his tone. 16 confirmed eliminations. You just saved our asses. Emma acknowledged with the briefest radio click. She wasn't there to be thanked or recognized. In fact, her very existence would be redacted from the official report. The Rangers would be extracted, and she would melt away into the mountains as she'd been trained to do, leaving nothing behind but brass casings and questions. What the Rangers didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Emma Walsh had once been Emma Chambers, the quiet daughter of a small-town police chief and a high school math teacher from Whispering Pines, Montana. A girl who could calculate trajectory angles in her head by age 12 and who'd once outshot every man at the county fair's rifle competition when she was 15. Her recruitment had come during her second year at MIT, where she'd been studying applied physics. A woman in a plain suit had approached her after class, remarking casually about Emma's paper on ballistic coefficients and offering her a chance to apply her theoretical knowledge in practical settings. 2 weeks later, Emma disappeared from campus, her academic records sealed by executive order. The specialized training facility in northern New Mexico wasn't on any map. For 18 months, she and 6 other women with similar aptitudes were pushed beyond conventional military training protocols. They didn't just learn to shoot, they learned to become invisible, to endure isolation for weeks, to control their autonomic functions through specialized breathing techniques. Only 3 women completed the program. One was now stationed in Eastern Europe. Another monitored cartels along the U.S. southern border. And Emma had been deployed to Afghanistan, where her existence was known only to the few officers with clearance to request her support. As the sun climbed higher over the Hindu Kush, Emma began the meticulous process of gathering her spent casings and preparing to relocate. Nothing could be left behind, no evidence of her position or presence. The official story would be that the Rangers had fought their way out of the ambush or received air support. Emma Walsh would remain a ghost, her contribution reduced to a cryptic footnote, Overwatch support provided. She moved with practiced precision, breaking down her rifle and securing it in the custom case she'd carry another 11 miles to her extraction point. Her movements were economical, disciplined, the result of countless repetitions and an almost obsessive attention to detail. This had been her life for 12 years. Deployment after deployment, position after position, shot after impossible shot. She'd saved more lives than she could count, all without recognition, without her name appearing in any report. The women in the program had been taught to take pride in this anonymity, to find satisfaction in the perfection of their craft rather than acknowledgement. But something had changed in Emma over the past year. A creeping sense that the anonymity had become a cage rather than a protection. The training had transformed her into something beyond ordinary human capability, but at a cost she was only now beginning to calculate. As she secured her pack and began her descent from the ridgeline, Emma's mind drifted to the conversation that had set today's events in motion. 3 days earlier, she'd been preparing for routine reconnaissance when Colonel Marcus Blackwood, her handler and the only person in country who knew her real name, had approached her quarters. "We've got a situation," he'd said without preamble. Ranger team compromised during HVT extraction. They need an angel. Angel was code for a sniper who could deliver salvation from above, typically in situations considered beyond conventional support capability. Location, she'd asked, already mentally preparing. Corangle Valley. Enemy force estimated at 12 to 20. Conventional support is no-go due to weather and political constraints. Emma had nodded once. Time frame? You deploy in 6 hours. They'll be pinned down by dawn. No further explanation needed. Emma had spent the next 5 hours studying topographical maps, memorizing terrain features, and calculating potential firing solutions based on weather forecasts. Then she'd been inserted by a specially modified helicopter, dropped 15 miles from the target area to approach on foot. Now, with the mission complete, she faced a 12-hour hike to her extraction point, alone, as always. The isolation had never bothered her before. In fact, she'd always preferred it, finding peace in the solitude that allowed her to focus entirely on her craft. But lately, the silence had begun to feel different, heavier somehow. Emma paused at a small stream to refill her water containers, adding purification tablets with mechanical precision. As she waited for the water to become potable, she caught her reflection in the calm surface, a face she barely recognized anymore. 34 years old, with eyes that held the steady detachment of someone who had spent too long looking at the world through a scope. The voice of her father echoed unexpectedly in her memory, "A gift like yours comes with responsibility, Emmy." He'd been teaching her to shoot, marveling at her natural talent even then. "Never use it unless you have to, and always remember that what you're aiming at isn't a target, it's a choice." She'd made so many choices since then, all of them necessary, all of them justified by the lives she'd saved. But the accumulated weight of those choices had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her radio crackled, interrupting her thoughts. "Overwatch, this is Extraction Team. Schedule update, over." Emma keyed her throat mic. "This is Overwatch, send it. Extraction Point Charlie is compromised. Divert to secondary location Delta. New pickup time 0400 hours. Acknowledged. Moving to Delta." The change meant another 8 miles of difficult terrain and a night exposed to dropping temperatures. Emma recalculated her route mentally, adjusting her pace and resource management without complaint. Adaptability was as much a part of her training as marksmanship. As she continued her descent, the mountain landscape around her began to shift from barren rock to sparse vegetation. The change in elevation brought different challenges. More cover meant more potential hiding places for threats, requiring heightened vigilance despite her growing fatigue. 12 hours later, as darkness enveloped the mountains, Emma arrived at Extraction Point Delta, an abandoned shepherd's hut on a small plateau that offered enough flat ground for a helicopter to land. She secured the perimeter with motion sensors, established multiple escape routes, and settled into a defensive position to wait. Sleep wasn't an option, only the controlled rest techniques she'd been taught, 20-minute intervals of near sleep while maintaining environmental awareness. The night passed in this measured rhythm, her mind cycling between alertness and carefully managed rest. At precisely 0345, Emma initiated her pre-extraction protocol. Sweeping the area for any evidence of her presence, confirming her equipment was secured, establishing communication with the approaching aircraft. Everything executed with the same precision that characterized her shooting. The helicopter appeared exactly on schedule, a black shape against the pre-dawn sky, rotors muffled by specialized technology. It touched down just long enough for Emma to board before lifting away, leaving the mountainside as though they had never been there. Inside the aircraft, Colonel Blackwood waited. His weathered face revealed nothing, but Emma had worked with him long enough to sense the unusual tension in his posture. 16 confirmed, she reported over the engine noise, her voice flat and professional. Rangers extracted safely. Blackwood nodded, then leaned closer. That was exceptional work, even by your standards. Emma didn't respond. Praise wasn't part of their professional relationship, and its sudden appearance put her on alert. There's something you should know, he continued, handing her a tablet. The Rangers had body cameras. Footage of your work has already been analyzed at command level. Emma took the device, her face remaining impassive as she swiped through images captured from the Ranger's perspective. The clean, sequential elimination of threats, each shot placed with impossible precision. Timestamps showing the compressed time frame in which she'd cleared the entire ambush. "So," she asked finally. "So, people are asking questions. The kind we've always avoided." Emma felt a shift in the air between them, the subtle realignment that comes when long-established boundaries begin to change. "What kind of questions?" Blackwood's eyes met hers directly. "Questions about how one person can do what you did. Questions about the program that created you. Questions about whether keeping assets like you in the shadows is still the right approach." For the first time in years, Emma felt something close to surprise. The program's existence had always depended on absolute secrecy. The women it produced were meant to be invisible, their capabilities never acknowledged outside a tiny circle of cleared personnel. What are you saying? I'm saying things are changing. The Pentagon is reevaluating certain classified programs, looking for capabilities that might serve broader strategic purposes. Emma processed this information with the same analytical detachment she applied to complex shooting variables. They want to weaponize our reputation. Blackwood nodded. Precisely. Your shot record at 2,500 yards, it's beyond what most military leaders believe possible. If your capabilities became known, even in limited circles, it becomes psychological warfare, Emma finished. The enemy never knows when or where we might be watching. That's the thinking. But it means the days of complete anonymity may be ending for you and the others. The helicopter banked toward the secure base where Emma would be debriefed. Below them, Afghanistan's mountains caught the first rays of sunrise, harsh terrain softened momentarily by golden light. Emma watched the landscape pass, considering implications that extended far beyond this single mission. Her entire identity had been built around invisibility. The program had deliberately selected women who could disappear into backgrounds, who lacked distinctive features, who could be forgotten as soon as they left a room. Emma had embraced this quality, finding freedom in being unseen, power in being perpetually underestimated. What would it mean to step out of those shadows, even partially? To become not just a weapon, but a known quantity, a deterrent by reputation rather than anonymous action? What do they want from me? She asked finally. For now, just a detailed analysis of today's operation. Technical specifications, decision processes, environmental variables. They want to understand exactly how you accomplished what the footage shows. Emma nodded once, her mind already shifting to the precision language she would use in her report. She would explain the calculations, the adjustments, the years of training that had made 16 impossible shots seem routine. But she knew there were elements she couldn't quantify, the intuitive understanding of how air moved between mountains, the perfect stillness she could create within herself, the way time seemed to slow when she entered that space between intention and action. As the helicopter approached the landing zone, Emma felt a strange tension building within her. For 12 years, she'd been a ghost, her extraordinary abilities hidden behind redactions and code names. She'd accepted that role completely, finding purpose in the pure execution of her skills without recognition. But now, as the boundaries of her world began to shift, Emma Walsh confronted an unexpected question: who is she beyond Overwatch? Beyond the perfect shot records and classified missions? If she stepped out of the shadows that had defined her existence, what would remain? The helicopter touched down, and Emma gathered her equipment with practiced efficiency. Whatever changes were coming, she would face them with the same disciplined focus she brought to every mission. One breath, one heartbeat, one perfect shot at a time. Colonel Blackwood remained silent as they exited the aircraft, but just before they entered the debriefing facility, he paused. For what it's worth, what you did today, saving those Rangers from impossible odds, it deserves recognition, even if that recognition never extends beyond a few security-cleared rooms. Emma met his gaze steadily. Recognition was never the point, sir. I know. That's what makes you extraordinary. As they passed through the secure doors, Emma felt something unexpected, a subtle shift in how Blackwood and the facility staff regarded her. The usual careful distance had been replaced by something new, respect tinged with awe, the kind reserved for those whose abilities transcend normal human limitations. She had lived so long in shadows that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, not just noticed, but truly seen for what she was capable of. The sensation was as disorienting as it was unfamiliar, and Emma wasn't yet sure if it represented freedom or simply a different kind of confinement. What she did know was that something fundamental had changed out there in the mountains. The perfect shots that had saved the Rangers hadn't just eliminated threats, they had begun to rewrite the boundaries of her carefully constructed existence. As Emma prepared for debriefing, one certainty remained: whatever came next, she would face it with the same unwavering precision that had made her the most lethal ghost in a program built on shadows and silence. The conference room felt smaller than it should have, its stark military design doing nothing to ease the tension filling the space. 5 generals, 2 CIA representatives, and Colonel Blackwood sat on one side of the table. Emma sat alone on the other side, her posture military perfect despite 36 hours without real sleep. On the wall-mounted screen behind them, footage from the Rangers' body cameras played on a silent loop, 16 hostiles eliminated in succession, each falling with surgical precision despite impossible distances and conditions. The timestamps in the corner revealed the compressed time frame in which she'd accomplished what should have been impossible. "Let's be clear about what we're seeing," General Lawrence said, his voice carrying the gravitas of 4 decades in military intelligence. At 2,500 yards, in variable wind conditions, with elevation differential and limited visibility, Specialist Walsh eliminated 16 armed combatants in under 12 minutes. No misses. Emma remained silent. It wasn't a question, and she'd been trained to volunteer nothing. The statistical probability of such performance, one of the CIA analysts added, is effectively 0. Even accounting for exceptional talent and training. Lawrence leaned forward. "What we need to understand, Specialist Walsh, is not just how you did it, but how consistently you can replicate these results." Emma met his gaze with professional detachment. "Sir, the program's performance metrics have been documented over 12 years of deployments. My shot records are consistent with mission parameters and training expectations." "That's precisely what concerns us," the second CIA representative interjected. "Your program operates so deep in the black that even those of us with highest clearances weren't fully aware of its capabilities until now. The question becomes, what else don't we know about what you've been developed to do?" The implication wasn't subtle. Emma recognized the fear beneath the professional veneer, fear of weapons developed beyond oversight, of capabilities that stretched the definition of human limitation. She'd encountered this reaction before, usually from conventional military personnel who witnessed her work firsthand. "The program objectives have remained consistent since inception," Blackwood intervened. "Development of long-range precision capabilities beyond conventional parameters. Nothing more exotic than extraordinary training and selection for specific physiological and psychological traits." And yet, General Lawrence continued, "What we witnessed in that valley goes beyond even the most optimistic projections for human performance." Emma understood what they weren't saying aloud. In an age of enhanced soldiers, chemical augmentation, and experimental technologies, any capability that seemed to transcend human limitation raised questions, and suspicions. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" she asked. Lawrence nodded. "What you're seeing is the result of 12 years of specialized training, physiological selection, and thousands of hours of practice. Female operators were selected for this program specifically because research indicated advantages in specific areas critical to extreme long-range shooting, fine motor control stability, cardiovascular efficiency at rest, and lower testosterone levels resulting in reduced microtremors during precision tasks." She continued with clinical precision. "When combined with specialized breath control techniques adapted from Olympic biathlon training and modified equipment optimized for our specific physiological profiles, the performance metrics you're witnessing become statistically viable, if still exceptional." The room fell silent as they processed her explanation, the first time most of them had heard her speak more than a few necessary words. "In other words," Lawrence said finally, "you're telling us there's no secret sauce. No chemical enhancement, no experimental technology, just the right people selected for the right traits, trained beyond conventional limitations." "Yes, sir." The generals exchanged glances, a silent communication born of decades working together. "Specialist Walsh," Lawrence continued, "we've been authorized to inform you of a strategic shift regarding your program. Given recent developments in global conflict dynamics, capabilities like yours are being re-evaluated for potential strategic deterrence value." Emma's expression remained neutral despite the internal alarms this triggered. "Strategic deterrence typically requires visibility, sir. Our program's effectiveness has always depended on remaining invisible." "That paradigm is changing," the CIA analyst replied. "We're facing adversaries who need to understand that certain lines cannot be crossed. Your recent operation has presented an opportunity to communicate that message in a controlled manner." Colonel Blackwood cleared his throat. What they're saying, Walsh, is that aspects of your mission record may be deliberately leaked to select intelligence channels. Not your identity, not your methods, just enough to establish that we possess capabilities beyond what is conventionally known. Emma processed this information with the same disciplined analysis she applied to complex firing solutions. They were weaponizing her reputation, or more accurately, the shadow of her reputation. The ghost made just visible enough to haunt the right minds. I understand, she said finally. What are my orders? Lawrence seemed relieved by her pragmatism. For now, continue operations as normal. We're selecting a mission that will serve as the vehicle for this strategic messaging. Something high-profile enough to catch attention without compromising broader security concerns. The meeting concluded with technical debriefings on the Ranger extraction operation, Emma detailing wind calculations, atmospheric variables, and the minute adjustments required for each shot. Throughout, she maintained the professional distance that had defined her career, revealing nothing of her thoughts about this fundamental shift in how her abilities would be utilized. Only when she was alone in her temporary quarters did Emma allow herself to consider the implications. The program had selected for women who could disappear, who could blend into backgrounds and remain forgettable. Her entire operational existence had been built around the principle that the most effective weapon was one the enemy never saw. Now they wanted to deliberately create a myth around her capabilities, not Emma Walsh specifically, but the ghost of what she represented. A sniper who could reach out beyond what anyone thought possible and deliver judgment with infallible precision. Her training had never prepared her for becoming a symbol. Emma moved through her post-mission routine with mechanical precision, cleaning her weapon components to microscopic standards, logging performance data, conducting physical recovery protocols. The familiar rhythms helped center her mind as she considered the changing landscape of her existence. A knock at her door interrupted these reflections. Colonel Blackwood entered without waiting for permission, carrying a secure tablet. New mission parameters, he said without preamble. Review immediately. Emma accepted the device, scanning the briefing with practiced efficiency. What she read caused her to look up sharply. This timeline is accelerated. Strategic considerations, Blackwood replied. The intelligence window won't remain open indefinitely. Emma returned to the briefing. The mission target was a high-value terrorism facilitator operating from a compound in Yemen, a location previously considered too politically sensitive for direct action. The compound's layout, security measures, and occupancy patterns were detailed with unusual thoroughness, suggesting extended surveillance. Most concerning was the operational timeline. She would deploy in less than 48 hours, with minimal acclimatization period. This target has been on multiple watch lists for years, she observed. Why the sudden priority? Blackwood's expression tightened. You know I can't discuss broader operational contexts. But his evasion confirmed what Emma already suspected. This mission wasn't being driven by conventional target prioritization. It had been selected specifically for its profile and complexity, a demonstration of capabilities for carefully chosen audiences. The shot profile is extreme, she noted, studying the topographical data. 3,200 yards, variable winds through an urban canyon, multiple thermal layers. Beyond what's considered possible by conventional standards, Blackwood agreed. Which is precisely why it's been selected. You want me to miss, Emma stated, the realization crystallizing. Not entirely, but you want evidence of multiple shot attempts. A record of extraordinary capability but still within human limitations. Blackwood's silence confirmed her assessment. A perfect shot would be dismissed as lucky, she continued, working through the logic. A miss followed by success creates a narrative of exceptional but human capability, more credible for your strategic messaging. Your insight into psychological operations has always been underutilized, Blackwood replied, neither confirming nor denying her analysis. Emma closed the briefing file. I'll begin preparations. After Blackwood departed, she sat motionless, considering this fundamental shift in mission parameters. For 12 years, she had operated with a single standard, perfection. One shot, one elimination, anything less represented failure. Now they were asking her to deliberately introduce imperfection, to calibrate her performance not for maximum effectiveness but for maximum psychological impact. The request felt like a violation of everything her training represented. Emma rose and began her pre-mission ritual, studying maps, memorizing terrain features, calculating initial firing solutions based on historical meteorological data. But beneath these practiced routines, her mind kept returning to the question of what it meant to weaponize not just her skills, but the perception of those skills. 46 hours later, Emma lay perfectly still on a rooftop in Sana'a, Yemen, her rifle positioned behind a ventilation housing that concealed her from street level. The ancient city stretched before her, a maze of mud brick buildings and narrow streets baked golden in the harsh sunlight. Her target location was 3,200 yards distant, a walled compound on the city's eastern edge where intelligence confirmed Farhan al-Bari, financial architect behind 3 major terrorist attacks, was meeting with operational planners. Through her scope, Emma methodically mapped the compound's security measures, rooftop sentries, surveillance cameras, entry and exit points. The intel package had been comprehensive, but she trusted only what she could verify with her own eyes. The shot profile was the most challenging she'd ever faced, not just the extreme distance, but the complex urban environment that created unpredictable wind patterns between buildings. Heat rising from sun-baked streets generated thermal distortion that would affect trajectory in ways that couldn't be perfectly calculated. It was, as Blackwood had implied, a shot designed to be nearly impossible, a test at the very limits of human capability. Emma's comm unit activated with a soft click. Overwatch, this is Control. Target confirmed on location. Authorization to engage when conditions permit. Copy, Control. Establishing final firing solution. Emma began the methodical process of calibrating her shot. Wind flags placed by an advance team provided data points across the distance. Atmospheric conditions measured by remote sensors fed into her calculations. But the most critical elements came from her own observations, the way heat shimmered above certain buildings, the movement of laundry hanging from balconies, the subtle shifts in dust patterns when wind funneled between structures. She made minute adjustments to her rifle's position, accounting for variables that would change between her first and second shots. Because there would be a second shot, she had decided to give her handlers exactly what they wanted, a deliberate miss followed by success, but on her own terms. The target appeared exactly as intelligence had predicted, moving to a specific room at the appointed time. Through her scope, Emma could see him clearly, a man in his 50s with a distinctive silver beard, speaking animatedly to 3 younger associates. Emma settled into position, aligning her body with her weapon, creating the perfect stillness that was her trademark. Her breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm she'd perfected through years of training, her heartbeat decelerating to a steady, measured pace. When she squeezed the trigger, the rifle's recoil was a familiar pressure against her shoulder. She tracked the bullet's flight path through her scope, watching as it missed the target by precisely 17 centimeters, exactly as she had calculated. The compound erupted into controlled chaos. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, rushing the target toward a fortified safe room in the compound's interior. Emma had already begun recalculating her firing solution, adjusting for the variables she'd meticulously documented. Her second shot would have an even narrower window, requiring her to thread the bullet through a specific pathway between buildings where the wind patterns were most predictable. She waited, perfectly still, as her target was rushed across an interior courtyard. The moment he passed through her predetermined engagement window, Emma fired again. This time, the shot found its mark with lethal precision. Through her scope, Emma watched the confirmation of effect, the target dropping instantly while his security team scrambled to identify a threat they couldn't possibly locate. Target neutralized, she reported, her voice maintaining the professional detachment that had become second nature. Confirmed, Control responded. Exfiltration team moving to your location in 30 minutes. Maintain position. Emma began the careful process of documenting her shot data, wind speeds, temperature gradients, exact distances. This information would become part of the mission record, evidence of the extraordinary calculations required for success at such extreme ranges. As she waited for extraction, Emma found herself reflecting on the deliberate miss she had executed. It represented something she'd never done before, a compromise of her professional standards for strategic purposes. The calculation had been just as precise, just as demanding as a successful shot, but it served a different master. Was this the beginning of a new reality where her skills would be calibrated not just for mission success but for perception management? Where the ghost would be made just visible enough to serve as a warning, while remaining obscure enough to preserve operational security? The extraction team arrived with typical efficiency, 4 operators who secured the area, dismantled her position, and escorted her to a waiting vehicle. No words were exchanged beyond necessary communications. These men didn't know her name, didn't need to know anything beyond their role in the mission. As they drove through Sanaa's narrow streets, Emma maintained situational awareness while processing the implications of what had just occurred. She had demonstrated capability beyond conventional parameters while simultaneously creating evidence of human limitation, precisely the narrative her handlers wanted to establish. The question that lingered as they reached the extraction point was whether this new paradigm would prove liberating or become simply another form of invisible constraint. 24 hours later, Emma sat in a secure debriefing room at an undisclosed facility in Djibouti. Colonel Blackwood reviewed her mission data with unusual attention to detail, particularly the calculations behind both shots. The miss was precisely calibrated, he observed, studying her documentation. 17 centimeters left of target, enough to be classified as a miss, but close enough to demonstrate extraordinary capability. Emma met his gaze. You wanted a record of human limitation combined with exceptional skill. I provided exactly that. You anticipated the strategic objective, Blackwood noted. And executed accordingly. I executed according to mission parameters, Emma corrected. The strategic context is above my clearance. Blackwood studied her for a long moment. You know, in 12 years, this is the first time you've ever demonstrated awareness of the broader implications of your deployments. You've always maintained strict focus on technical execution. The parameters have changed, Emma replied simply. My awareness has adjusted accordingly. The truth, which she kept to herself, was more complex. For 12 years, she had deliberately maintained the professional distance her training demanded, focusing exclusively on technical perfection while remaining detached from strategic contexts. That detachment had been a form of protection, allowing her to exist purely as an instrument of precision rather than confronting the more complicated questions of how that precision was being utilized. But the Yemen operation had forced a shift in perspective. By asking her to deliberately calibrate her performance for psychological impact rather than pure effectiveness, her handlers had inadvertently pulled her into strategic considerations she'd previously avoided. The operation achieved its objectives, Blackwood said finally. Both the elimination of a high-value target and the establishment of a capability baseline that will be strategically useful in certain circles. What happens now? Emma asked, the question broader than she typically would have ventured. You return to standard operations while leadership evaluates the next phase of program implementation. There are ongoing discussions about expanded utilization of your unique capabilities. Emma understood the bureaucratic language. Her performance had opened doors to new deployments, new applications of her skills that went beyond the straightforward elimination of threats. She had become not just a weapon but a strategic asset to be leveraged in more complex ways. Understood, she replied, defaulting to the professional acknowledgement that had served her for 12 years. But as she left the debriefing, Emma found herself considering possibilities that had never before seemed relevant. For her entire operational life, she had existed as a ghost, her extraordinary capabilities hidden within the shadows of classified programs. Now those capabilities were being deliberately, if partially, revealed. What would it mean to step further into the light? To acknowledge not just her skills but her identity as something beyond an operational designator? These questions followed Emma as she was transported to a secure facility for post-mission recovery. The standard protocol called for 3 days of physiological monitoring, nutrition optimization, and controlled rest before preparing for the next deployment. It was a clinical, efficient process designed to maintain her as a precision instrument. But this time, the routine felt different, not in its external parameters, but in Emma's internal experience of it. For the first time, she found herself questioning not just how she performed, but why, and for whom. As she moved through the familiar recovery protocols, Emma began formulating calculations of a different kind, not trajectory adjustments or win compensations, but the complex variables of her own existence and the paths that might lie beyond the narrow parameters that had defined her for so long. The ghost had begun to contemplate its own substance, and in that contemplation lay possibilities neither Emma nor her handlers had anticipated, possibilities that would soon reshape not just missions and objectives, but the very nature of what it meant to exist as the world's most lethal shadow. 3 weeks after the Yemen operation, Emma found herself in an unfamiliar position, standing before a gathering of military leadership so classified that the room itself didn't officially exist. Located 70 feet beneath the Pentagon in a section absent from any blueprint, the chamber was reserved for briefings that could reshape national security strategy. The generals and intelligence directors seated at the curved table represented the hidden architecture of American military power, the decision-makers whose names rarely appeared in press briefings but whose judgments determined the course of operations across the globe. Specialist Walsh, General Lawrence began, "Your recent operations have demonstrated capabilities that force us to reconsider certain strategic assumptions. We've brought you here because the program you represent has reached an inflection point." Emma stood at parade rest, her posture reflecting years of disciplined training. The unfamiliar weight of a dress uniform replaced her usual operational gear, a concession to protocol that felt like a costume rather than clothing. "Sir, I'm prepared to receive new operational parameters," she responded, defaulting to the professional detachment that had defined her career. Lawrence exchanged glances with the CIA director before continuing. "This isn't about operational parameters. This is about fundamental program orientation." The room's atmosphere shifted subtly as a secure display activated, showing footage Emma immediately recognized, her shots from both the Ranger extraction in Afghanistan and the Yemen elimination. The footage had been enhanced, trajectory paths visualized as glowing lines stretching across impossible distances, impact points highlighted with clinical precision. "What you're seeing," the CIA director explained, "represents a capability that extends beyond our current strategic doctrine. Traditional deterrence relies on visible power projection, aircraft carriers, missile systems, conventional deployments. But increasingly, our adversaries operate in environments where such projections are limited by political constraints." Emma listened with growing understanding. This wasn't just about her performance, it was about how her capabilities could be weaponized beyond direct action. "We've initiated limited intelligence leaks regarding your Yemen operation," Lawrence continued. "Controlled disclosures to specific channels where the information will reach adversary analysis teams. Not your identity, not your methods, just enough evidence to establish that we possess capabilities beyond conventional parameters." The implications crystallized in Emma's analytical mind. They were creating a myth, a shadow that would haunt operational planners across enemy territory. The knowledge that someone could reach out from beyond visual range and deliver judgment with supernatural precision would force adversaries to change behavior, limit movements, restrict operations. "The psychological impact has exceeded projections," the intelligence analyst beside Lawrence added. "We're already seeing evidence of behavioral changes among high-value targets in 3 theaters. Reduced movement, enhanced security protocols, paranoia about potential observation. In other words," Lawrence concluded, "you've become a strategic asset beyond your direct operational impact. The very possibility of your deployment creates effects without requiring actual operations." Emma processed this information with the same detached analysis she applied to complex firing solutions. "I understand the strategic application, sir. What are the new mission parameters?" The room fell silent for a moment before Lawrence responded. "That's what we're here to determine. Your program was designed for direct action, identify target, eliminate target, remain invisible. but these recent developments suggest potential for broader application. The intelligence director leaned forward. We're considering expanded operational scope. Using your capabilities not just for elimination but for strategic influence operations. Influence operations, sir? Emma kept her voice neutral despite the internal alarms this triggered. Such missions typically involve psychological manipulation, information warfare, and objectives far more ambiguous than the clean certainty of a well-placed shot. The mere possibility of your presence changes adversary behavior, Lawrence explained. We want to leverage that effect more deliberately. What followed was a briefing on a new mission profile unlike anything in Emma's experience, deployment not to eliminate a target but to create the perception of vulnerability among a network of targets. She would establish positions that would be discoverable after her departure, leaving evidence of observation without taking direct action. The psychological impact would disrupt enemy operations more effectively than selective elimination. Emma listened with outward composure, but her mind raced through implications. This fundamental shift represented not just new tactics but a transformation of her role from precision instrument to psychological weapon. The certainty that had defined her existence, the clean mathematics of ballistics, the absolute judgment of a perfectly placed shot, would be replaced by the murky calculus of perception management. Questions, Specialist Walsh? Lawrence prompted as the briefing concluded. Emma hesitated, then spoke with careful precision. Sir, the program selected operators based on specific psychological profiles. We were trained for certainty, for perfection in execution. These new parameters introduce variables that contradict that training. It was the most direct challenge she had ever voiced to leadership, and the room's atmosphere tightened in response. For 12 years, Emma Walsh had been the perfect instrument, executing without question, adapting without complaint. This glimpse of independent assessment came as a surprise. Your concern is noted, Lawrence replied after a moment. But the decision has been made at the highest levels. The first deployment under the new parameters is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. You'll receive detailed briefings through Colonel Blackwood. As the meeting concluded, Emma felt something unfamiliar, not the clean certainty of mission preparation, but the uncomfortable weight of doubt. For the first time, she questioned not just how she would execute, but whether the execution itself aligned with her own internal compass. The revelation struck her with unexpected force. After 12 years as the perfect weapon, Emma Walsh was discovering the existence of her own agency. 3 days later, Emma found herself in Colorado's Rocky Mountains, at the isolated training facility where the program had first transformed her from promising recruit into extraordinary asset. The facility existed on no official maps, hidden within a privately owned wildlife preserve with security systems that rivaled military installations. Colonel Blackwood had arranged her transfer here for advanced preparation before the new mission parameters went live. In reality, Emma suspected, leadership wanted to observe her adaptation to the shifting expectations, to ensure their precision instrument wouldn't fracture under recalibration. The training scenarios reflected the new mission profile, establishing observation positions that would later be discovered, leaving psychological breadcrumbs rather than eliminating targets. Each exercise ended not with confirmation of elimination but with complex assessments of psychological impact on simulated adversaries. Emma executed with her characteristic precision, but something had changed in her internal landscape. Each scenario triggered not just technical analysis but deeper questions about purpose and agency. On the 4th day, as she completed a particularly complex simulation involving multiple observation points and deliberately ambiguous evidence trails, Blackwood approached her at the shooting range where she maintained her core skills. Your adaptation to the new parameters is impressive, he observed, watching as she cycled through precision shots at ranges that would have been impossible for conventional marksmen. Adaptation is part of the job, Emma replied, her focus remaining on the distant targets. True. But there's something different in your execution patterns. You're performing above standards, but your approach has shifted. Emma lowered her rifle, turning to face Blackwood directly. The mission parameters have changed. My approach has adjusted accordingly. It's more than that, Blackwood pressed. You're thinking beyond execution. considering implications, strategic contexts. That's new. For a moment, Emma considered deflecting, falling back on the professional detachment that had served her for 12 years. But something had fundamentally shifted since the Yemen operation, and pretending otherwise seemed suddenly impossible. "When you asked me to deliberately miss in Yemen," she said finally, "you changed the contract. For 12 years, I've been trained for perfection, one shot, one elimination. When you introduced imperfection as a strategic choice, you invited judgment into the equation." Blackwood's expression revealed nothing, but Emma sensed his careful attention to her words. "And now," he prompted. "Now you're asking me to deploy not for direct action but psychological manipulation. That requires different calculations, different judgments. You can't expect me to make those judgments while simultaneously pretending I'm just following orders." The words hung between them, the most direct challenge Emma had ever issued to program authority. For 12 years, she had been the perfect instrument, executing without question, adapting without complaint. Now she was asserting something unprecedented, the existence of her own perspective. Blackwood studied her with newfound consideration. "You know, the program's psychological profiling predicted this possibility. Not specifically, but generally, that operators developed for such extreme specialization might eventually evolve beyond their initial parameters. Is that a problem?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the potential implications. "That depends," Blackwood replied. "On whether your evolution enhances or compromises mission effectiveness. My shot records speak for themselves." "They do. But these new mission profiles require more than technical excellence. They require judgment, psychological insight, adaptability beyond mechanical parameters. The question is whether your evolution includes those qualities or just independent thinking." Emma considered this assessment with the same analytical detachment she applied to complex firing solutions. The program selected for specific psychological traits, detail orientation, emotional regulation, capacity for extended isolation. But you also selected for intelligence, for problem-solving capability. Did you really expect those qualities would remain confined to ballistic calculations forever? A hint of something like respect flickered across Blackwood's features. "No. The real question was always when, not if, our best operators would begin asking the larger questions. The timing is just consequential, given the strategic shifts currently underway." Emma processed this revelation, that her emerging autonomy had been anticipated, perhaps even expected, by program architects. What remained unclear was whether that autonomy would be accommodated or eliminated as a potential threat to operational control. "What happens now?" she asked directly. "You continue preparation for the new mission profile," Blackwood replied. "And I continue evaluating whether your evolution represents an asset or a liability." The conversation ended there, but its implications resonated through Emma's subsequent training. She executed each scenario with characteristic precision while simultaneously processing the larger context of what was happening, not just to her mission parameters but to her fundamental identity as an operator. For 12 years, Emma Walsh had been defined by clean certainty, the perfect shot, the eliminated threat, the invisible presence that left nothing behind but results. Now she was being asked to operate in ambiguity, to create psychological effects rather than definitive outcomes, to exist not just as a ghost but as a deliberately crafted myth. The transformation demanded more than technical adaptation, it required her to engage with questions she'd previously avoided, about agency, about purpose, about the space between being an instrument and becoming something more complex. 1 week into the specialized training, Emma was summoned to a secure communication facility within the compound. The transmission originated from General Lawrence himself, his expression grave even through the encrypted video link. "Specialist Walsh, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. A surveillance team tracking a high-value target network in the Philippines has been compromised. 4 operators captured, with evidence suggesting imminent execution for propaganda purposes." Emma's mind immediately shifted to operational mode, processing tactical implications. Rescue parameters? Conventional extraction has been deemed non-viable. The captives are held in a compound with overlapping security zones, multiple armed personnel, and civilian presence that complicates direct action. Then why contact me? Emma asked, though she already suspected the answer. My skill set is precision elimination, not hostage extraction. Lawrence's expression hardened slightly. Because the compound is situated in a valley with a particular topographical feature, a ridgeline at 2,800 yards with direct sight lines to key security positions. Beyond conventional sniper range, but potentially within your operational parameters. The mission profile crystallized in Emma's tactical mind. She would eliminate key security elements from an impossible distance, creating a window for a small extraction team to enter the compound with minimal opposition. How soon? She asked, already calculating preparation requirements. Wheels up in 90 minutes. You'll receive full briefing materials during transport. As the transmission ended, Emma felt a familiar clarity replacing the philosophical questions that had occupied her mind recently. Whatever her evolving thoughts about agency and purpose, for operators faced execution without immediate intervention. The clean certainty of this mission, where success and failure had immediate, measurable consequences, offered a temporary reprieve from the ambiguity of her changing role. 90 minutes later, Emma boarded a specially modified transport aircraft, her equipment meticulously prepared, her mind focused on the mission parameters. Colonel Blackwood joined her for the initial briefing, his presence indicating the operation's priority level. The target compound is located in Mindanao's western mountains, he explained, displaying satellite imagery on a secure tablet. Hostages are held in this central structure, with security elements concentrated at these positions. Emma studied the topographical data with practiced efficiency, identifying the ridgeline Lawrence had mentioned and calculating initial firing solutions based on distance and elevation. The shot profile is complex but viable. Wind patterns through the valley will be the primary challenge. The extraction team consists of 6 operators from Joint Special Operations Command, Blackwood continued. They'll insert via helicopter once you've eliminated the priority targets and created the necessary window. Emma noted the positions marked as priority eliminations, for security leaders whose removal would create maximum disruption with minimal risk to hostages. Time window for extraction? Intelligence indicates the executions are scheduled for 0600 local time tomorrow. You'll deploy to the ridgeline at 0100, establish position, and eliminate the designated targets at precisely 0430, creating the window for extraction team insertion at 0445. The timeline was tight but manageable. What caught Emma's attention was a detail in the operational directive. This says I maintain position after the extraction to eliminate any pursuit elements. That extends exposure risk significantly. Blackwood nodded. Risk assessment indicates the extraction team will need continued overwatch support during their withdrawal. Your position on the ridgeline provides the necessary coverage. Emma processed this directive against her training in risk management. Typically, her deployments minimized exposure time, eliminate targets, withdraw immediately, leave no evidence. This extended overwatch represented a significant departure from standard protocols. The risk profile exceeds normal parameters, she observed. The circumstances exceed normal parameters, Blackwood countered. For operators facing execution. Sometimes the mission demands accepting greater risk. Emma couldn't argue with the assessment. Whatever her evolving thoughts about agency and purpose, the immediate objective was clear: prevent the execution of captured operators by creating a window for extraction. The mathematics of risk became secondary to the imperative of the mission. Understood, she replied, returning to the tactical data. The aircraft banked eastward, carrying Emma toward a mission that would test not just her extraordinary skills but her evolving understanding of what those skills meant in the broader context of her existence. For years, she had been the perfect ghost, invisible, untraceable, leaving nothing behind but results. Now circumstances demanded she become something more visible, more vulnerable, more human in her willingness to accept risk for others. As she reviewed the mission parameters, Emma found herself calculating not just trajectories and wind patterns but something more fundamental: the value of her own existence weighed against the lives she was tasked with saving. It was a calculation beyond ballistics, beyond training, beyond the clean certainty that had defined her operational life. In that calculation lay the seeds of transformation, from perfect instrument to autonomous agent, from weapon to warrior. Whatever happened on that Philippine ridgeline would mark not just another mission but a definitive step in Emma Walsh's evolution beyond the boundaries of her programming. The realization settled over her with unexpected clarity: this mission would determine not just whether 4 operators lived or died, but whether Emma herself could become something more than the ghost she had been trained to be. The stakes had never been higher, not just for the hostages but for her own emerging humanity. The midnight air in Mindanao carried the rich, damp scent of tropical vegetation as Emma moved through dense forest toward her designated position. Local guides had brought her to the base of the ridgeline before disappearing back into the darkness, leaving her to make the final ascent alone, as she preferred. The climb demanded perfect control of her breathing and movement, her 60-pound equipment pack balanced precisely to maintain silence as she navigated the steep terrain. Each footstep was placed with deliberate care, avoiding loose rocks and brittle vegetation that might betray her presence. 3 hours into her approach, Emma reached the narrow outcropping that intelligence had identified as her firing position. The ledge offered both concealment and the necessary sight lines to the compound 2,800 yards distant, where 4 American operators awaited either rescue or execution. With practiced efficiency, she established her position, setting up her custom Macmillan TAC-338 rifle on a carbon fiber tripod, anchoring stabilization systems, and arranging her equipment for silent, efficient access. The process felt like a ritual, each movement refined through thousands of repetitions across dozens of deployments. Once her position was secured, Emma began the meticulous process of gathering environmental data. Wind flags placed by advanced teams provided initial readings, but she supplemented these with her own observations, watching how moonlight caught the movement of vegetation across the valley, noting the behavior of smoke from distant cooking fires, feeling the subtle shifts in air currents against her exposed skin. Through her advanced optics, the target compound appeared in stark detail despite the distance: security personnel moving in predictable patterns, guard positions illuminated by minimal lighting, the central structure where thermal imaging confirmed 4 human forms confined in a small room. The hostages, still alive. Emma methodically identified her 4 primary targets, the security leaders whose elimination would create the critical window for the extraction team. Each required different firing solutions accounting for their positions, the specific wind currents affecting that trajectory, and the precise timing required for simultaneous effect. As she made these calculations, Emma's mind remained unusually divided, part focused on the technical demands of the mission, part still processing the philosophical questions that had emerged since Yemen. For the first time in her operational life, she found herself considering not just how she would execute her mission, but why, and what it meant beyond the immediate tactical objective. The hostages represented a direct, uncomplicated imperative, for lives that would end without her intervention. But the broader context of her deployment, the evolution of her role from precision instrument to psychological weapon, continued to occupy the corners of her consciousness even as she prepared for the shot sequence. Emma's comm unit activated with a soft click. "Overwatch, this is extraction lead. We are in position, awaiting your window. Confirm status." "Extraction lead, this is Overwatch," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Position established. Environmental calculations complete. Window will open precisely at 0430 as planned." "Copy that, Overwatch. Standing by." The hours before dawn passed in disciplined vigilance as Emma monitored the compound, tracking security rotations and finalizing her firing solutions. The challenge was unprecedented, 4 targets requiring elimination within a 5-second window, each at extreme distance, each requiring different compensations for environmental variables. Even for Emma, with her extraordinary capabilities, the shot sequence pushed the boundaries of what was humanly possible. The margin for error was effectively 0. At 0425, she began her final preparation sequence, controlling her respiratory rate, slowing her heartbeat through techniques adapted from advanced meditation practices, creating the perfect stillness that had become her trademark. Extraction lead, this is Overwatch, she transmitted. Window opens in 5 minutes. Confirm readiness. Overwatch, we are ready. Insertion on your mark. Emma settled into position, her body becoming one with her weapon, her mind entering the state of focused clarity where external distractions ceased to exist. There was only the shot, the space between heartbeats, and the absolute certainty of what would happen when she squeezed the trigger. At precisely 0430, she initiated the shot sequence. First target acquired, security leader on the eastern perimeter. Exhale half breath, hold, squeeze. The TAC-338 bucked against her shoulder, the sound barely audible through her advanced suppressor. 7 seconds later, the time required for the bullet to travel 2,800 yards, the first target dropped. Without pause, Emma had already cycled her bolt and acquired the second target. Another shot, another hit. The third and fourth targets followed in rapid succession, each shot finding its mark with supernatural precision. Within 12 seconds, all 4 security leaders had been eliminated, creating the critical gap in the compound's defensive structure. Targets neutralized, Emma transmitted. Window open. Execute extraction. In the valley below, the extraction team's helicopter appeared like a shadow against the predawn sky, rotors muffled by specialized technology. It descended toward the compound with practiced precision, touching down in the designated landing zone that Emma's shots had effectively cleared of opposition. Through her scope, Emma tracked the remaining security personnel as they reacted to the sudden elimination of their leadership. Their movements betrayed confusion, lack of coordinated response, exactly the window the extraction team needed. 6 operators exited the helicopter in tactical formation, moving toward the central structure with disciplined efficiency. Emma provided continuous overwatch, eliminating 2 additional security personnel who moved to intercept the team. Each shot required split-second calculation of changing variables, wind shifts, target movement, the decreasing darkness as dawn approached. When the extraction team reached the hostages, Emma shifted her focus to potential opposition from surrounding terrain. Intelligence had indicated possible reinforcements in nearby villages, and her position on the ridgeline provided the necessary vantage point to identify and neutralize any approaching threats. Overwatch, hostages secured, came the transmission from extraction lead. Moving to extraction point now. Maintain coverage. Emma acknowledged with a professional click. Through her scope, she watched as the team escorted 4 figures toward the waiting helicopter, American operators who had been hours away from execution, now moving toward safety. The extraction proceeded with textbook precision until, at the final moment, a previously unidentified threat emerged, a security element approaching from the compound's western boundary, outside the original surveillance zone. 6 armed combatants moving with coordinated purpose toward the helicopter as its rotors began to spin. Extraction lead, opposition approaching from your 6, Emma transmitted. 6 combatants, armed, 300 meters in closing. The team leader's response was immediate, cannot delay takeoff. Hostage 2 needs immediate medical. Can you provide coverage? Emma calculated the rapidly evolving scenario. The approaching combatants would reach effective firing range in approximately 40 seconds. The helicopter required at least 60 seconds to achieve liftoff and clear the compound. The extraction team was fully committed to loading the injured hostage, unable to establish defensive positions. Affirmative, she replied, already adjusting her firing position. I have them. What followed would later be described in classified reports as the most extraordinary display of rapid-fire precision shooting in operational history. Emma engaged the 6 approaching combatants with a speed and accuracy that defied conventional limitations, 6 shots in less than 15 seconds, each finding its mark despite the extreme distance, each accounting for unique environmental variables. The approaching threat neutralized, the helicopter lifted clear of the compound, banking sharply towards safety with its precious cargo of rescued operators. Through her scope, Emma watched it disappear into the lightening sky, confirmation that the primary mission objective had been achieved. Now came the most dangerous phase of her own mission, the withdrawal from an exposed position in daylight conditions. Standard protocol would have positioned an extraction team for her as well, but operational constraints had forced a different approach. Emma would need to withdraw on foot to a secondary extraction point 8 miles distant, moving through terrain that would soon be swarming with hostile forces investigating the compound breach. She began the methodical process of breaking down her position, collecting spent casings, removing all evidence of her presence, securing her equipment for the arduous journey ahead. Her movements remained precise despite growing awareness of her vulnerability. The ridgeline that had provided ideal firing position would become a death trap once enemy forces began searching the surrounding terrain. As Emma prepared to withdraw, her comm unit activated once more. Overwatch, this is Extraction Lead. We are clear with all packages. Medical attending to injuries. We owe you. Acknowledged, Emma replied simply. Safe journey. What's your status? The team leader pressed, unusual concern in his voice. Typically, different operational elements maintain strict communication discipline, focusing only on mission-critical information. Proceeding to secondary extraction as planned, Emma responded, her tone professionally neutral despite the challenging withdrawal ahead. There was a pause before the response came. Command has authorized us to divert for your extraction if you provide coordinates. The offer was unprecedented, altering an established extraction plan to retrieve a solitary operator, potentially exposing the rescued hostages to additional risk. It represented a fundamental shift in how Emma's value was being calculated within the operational hierarchy. For a moment, Emma considered accepting. The daylight withdrawal carried significant risk, especially as enemy forces would soon be alerted to the compound breach. But diverting the helicopter would extend the rescued operator's exposure, potentially compromising the primary mission objective. Negative, she replied after brief consideration. Proceed with primary extraction as planned. I'll make the secondary. Copy that, Overwatch. Good luck. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, Emma began her withdrawal, moving with the practiced stealth that had become second nature through years of specialized training. The descent from the ridgeline demanded perfect balance between speed and concealment, moving fast enough to create distance before enemy forces organized their search, yet carefully enough to leave no trail. 2 hours into her withdrawal, Emma detected the first signs of pursuit, helicopter rotors echoing through the valley as enemy forces initiated aerial search patterns. She adjusted her route accordingly, using dense vegetation for cover and navigating through terrain too difficult for conventional tracking. The pursuit intensified as the day progressed. Emma's communications monitoring picked up increased chatter, descriptions of a possible lone operator, search grids being established, tracking teams deployed. Her legend was becoming reality, the ghost made visible enough to hunt but still elusive enough to evade. For hours from her secondary extraction point, Emma encountered the first direct threat, a 3-man tracking team moving along her projected route. She avoided engagement, using her superior fieldcraft to create an alternative path that added distance but preserved her concealment. The diversion cost precious time. As the afternoon light began to fade, Emma calculated that she would miss her scheduled extraction window. Secondary protocols dictated a 24-hour delay before the next opportunity, a delay that significantly reduced her survival probability as search efforts intensified. She needed to reach the extraction point regardless, to establish position and await the next window. The terrain had become increasingly challenging, steep ravines and exposed ridgelines offering few routes that balanced progress with concealment. As Emma navigated a particularly exposed section, disaster struck. A reconnaissance helicopter appeared without warning, its flight path bringing it directly over her position. She froze in place, utilizing her ghillie suit's camouflage properties, but the aircraft's advanced sensors detected anomalous readings. The helicopter circled back for confirmation, hovering lower, its door gunner scanning the terrain with methodical precision. Emma remained perfectly still, employing the breathing techniques that allowed her to virtually disappear into her surroundings. But the sensors had already registered her heat signature, different from the surrounding vegetation in ways invisible to the human eye but clear to thermal imaging. When the first rounds impacted nearby, Emma abandoned concealment for movement, sprinting toward the nearest cover as the helicopter's gunner tracked her position. She cleared the ridgeline seconds before concentrated fire shredded the ground where she had been, sliding into a ravine that provided temporary shelter from aerial observation. The helicopter's pilot immediately radioed her position, and Emma's monitoring confirmed what she already knew: ground teams were being redirected to her location, converging from multiple directions to establish a containment perimeter. For the first time in her operational career, Emma faced the real possibility of being compromised. Not just mission failure, but capture, an outcome her training had established as unacceptable under any circumstances. The protocols were clear: operators with her level of classified knowledge were expected to prevent capture through any means necessary, including final solutions. As she assessed her deteriorating situation, Emma experienced something unexpected, not the detached tactical analysis that had defined her operational life, but a fierce, personal determination that transcended training and protocols. She would not be captured, not because of program directives, but because she had chosen to complete this mission, to save the hostages, to accept the risks that came with that choice. The realization crystallized with unexpected clarity, somewhere between the precision shots from the ridgeline and this desperate evasion through hostile territory. Emma Walsh had transitioned from being a weapon to becoming a warrior, making choices based not just on tactical parameters but on internal values that transcended programming. With renewed focus, Emma analyzed her options. The extraction point was still 4 miles distant, with multiple search teams between her current position and that objective. Direct movement would almost certainly result in interception. She needed to create a diversion, to redirect the search long enough to reach the secondary extraction point. Emma retrieved a specialized device from her equipment, a thermal decoy designed to mimic human heat signatures. Activating the device, she secured it in a location that suggested movement in the opposite direction from her intended route, then programmed it for delayed activation. When the decoy activated 30 minutes later, enemy communications erupted with reports of movement detected heading eastward. Search assets immediately redirected, creating the window Emma needed to advance westward toward her extraction point. The diversion bought precious time, but not enough. As night fell, Emma's monitoring confirmed that search teams had recognized the deception and were recalculating their containment strategy. They were adapting to her tactics, becoming more sophisticated in their pursuit, a concerning development that suggested they understood exactly what they were hunting. 3 miles from the extraction point, Emma encountered a natural choke point, a narrow pass between steep cliffs that offered the only feasible route forward. Intel indicated a search team had established position there, effectively blocking her path to safety. Standard protocol would dictate bypassing the position regardless of time cost. But Emma's calculated window was rapidly closing. She needed to reach the extraction point before dawn or face another full day exposed to intensifying search efforts. For the first time in her operational career, Emma voluntarily chose direct engagement when evasion remained possible. Utilizing her extraordinary shooting skills in a context far removed from her usual precision elimination, she initiated a complex deception operation, firing from multiple positions to create the impression of a larger force, using sound discipline to manipulate the enemy's perception, systematically dismantling their blocking position through psychological warfare rather than direct elimination. When the search team finally withdrew from the choke point, believing themselves outnumbered and outflanked, Emma advanced through the cleared route with renewed urgency. The extraction point lay just beyond the next ridge, an abandoned logging camp with sufficient clearing for helicopter access. She reached the position with 40 minutes remaining before her extraction window, immediately establishing security and conducting counter-tracking measures to eliminate evidence of her approach. The area appeared secure, no immediate threats detected, but Emma's instincts registered subtle warning signs: the absence of expected wildlife sounds, faint electromagnetic signatures suggesting communications equipment in the vicinity. As she established her defensive position, Emma's suspicions were confirmed. Her sensitive monitoring equipment detected encrypted transmissions consistent with enemy forces establishing containment positions around the extraction zone. They had somehow anticipated her destination and prepared accordingly. The trap was sophisticated, designed not to engage prematurely but to close once her extraction helicopter appeared, capturing both the valuable operator and the aircraft sent to retrieve her. Emma recognized the tactical approach as consistent with high-level special operations planning, suggesting her pursuers included forces with advanced training. She faced an impossible choice: signal the approaching extraction team to abort, guaranteeing her own compromise, or allow them to fly into a prepared ambush. Neither option aligned with mission parameters or personal values that had emerged through her evolution beyond program conditioning. In that moment of crisis, Emma Walsh made a decision that transcended her training, protocols, and programming. She would neither sacrifice herself nor endanger the extraction team. She would create a third option through the application of her extraordinary capabilities in a context beyond anything in her operational history. Using her advanced communications equipment, Emma sent a precisely encrypted burst transmission to her extraction team, LZ compromised. Alternative approach required. Transmitting coordinates for modified extraction. Then she began preparing for what would become the most audacious operation of her career, not a precision elimination from concealed position, but a deliberate revelation of capabilities designed to disrupt enemy tactical planning. When her extraction helicopter appeared precisely on schedule, it did not approach the compromised landing zone. Instead, it maintained position 2 miles distant, hovering at the coordinates Emma had specified in her burst transmission. As enemy forces realized their ambush had been detected, they initiated their contingency plan, deploying hidden anti-aircraft assets intended to neutralize the helicopter regardless of its position. But these systems required target acquisition, providing the electronic signatures Emma had anticipated. One by one, she eliminated the anti-aircraft positions, not from concealment but from deliberately visible locations, creating a psychological effect as devastating as the physical elimination of the threats. Each shot came from a different position, creating the impression of multiple operators working in coordinated fashion, shattering the enemy's tactical assumptions about what they were facing. The effect was immediate and profound. Enemy communications reflected growing disorientation, tactical paralysis as commanders attempted to reconcile the impossible, precision elimination of concealed positions at extreme distances by what appeared to be multiple operators moving with supernatural speed. In this moment of created chaos, Emma executed the final phase of her improvised extraction, moving not toward the hovering helicopter but to a previously unidentified tertiary position where a smaller, stealth-modified aircraft waited, its presence concealed by terrain features and advanced technology. As enemy forces redirected their attention toward the more visible primary helicopter, Emma boarded the secondary aircraft, which immediately departed using a nap-of-Earth flight profile that rendered it effectively invisible to conventional tracking methods. The extraction complete, Emma finally allowed herself to process what had occurred, not just the tactical success against overwhelming odds, but the fundamental transformation in how she had approached the mission. She had moved beyond the parameters of her training, beyond the limitations of program conditioning, to become something her creators had perhaps never anticipated, a fully autonomous agent making independent judgments based on internal values rather than external directives. As the aircraft carried her toward safety, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point, from the precise shots that saved the Rangers in Afghanistan, to the deliberate miss in Yemen that introduced choice into her performance, to this final evolution where she had rewritten the very nature of her operational identity. The perfect weapon had become a perfect warrior, not through abandonment of her extraordinary capabilities, but through the discovery that those capabilities served something beyond tactical objectives. They served the values and choices of the woman who had emerged from behind the precision instrument. 3 days later, Emma sat across from General Lawrence in a secure debriefing facility, her mission report completed with characteristic thoroughness despite the unconventional nature of what had transpired. "Your extraction decisions exceeded operational parameters," Lawrence observed, his tone neutral rather than accusatory. "Standard protocols were disregarded in favor of improvised solutions. The situation exceeded standard parameters, Emma replied, echoing Blackwood's earlier assessment about the hostage rescue. Improvisation was necessary to achieve mission objectives. Lawrence studied her with newfound consideration. The psychological impact on enemy forces has been significant. Their after-action analysis suggests they encountered not one operator but an entire specialized unit with unprecedented capabilities. The myth has grown beyond our strategic projections. Emma remained silent, awaiting the true purpose of this conversation. What interests me, Lawrence continued, is not just the tactical success but the evolution it represents. You're no longer simply executing parameters, you're making independent judgments about how those parameters should be applied or modified. Is that a problem? Emma asked, directly echoing her earlier conversation with Blackwood. Lawrence's response surprised her. On the contrary. It represents the next phase in program development, operators who can function not just as precision instruments but as autonomous decision-makers in complex environments. The question is whether the program can adapt to this evolution as effectively as you have. The implication was clear: the relationship between Emma and her handlers was fundamentally changing, from one of operator and controllers to something approaching mutual respect between professionals with complementary capabilities. What happens now? Emma asked. That depends partly on you, Lawrence replied. Your capabilities remain extraordinary, your mission success rate unparalleled. But the context in which those capabilities will be deployed is evolving. We need to determine whether your evolution aligns with that changing context. For the first time in her career, Emma found herself directly engaging with strategic-level considerations rather than simply receiving operational directives. The Philippines operation demonstrated that my evolution enhances rather than compromises mission effectiveness. Independent judgment allowed adaptation to circumstances beyond anticipated parameters. Lawrence nodded slowly. That's the assessment at leadership level as well. Which is why you're being offered a choice rather than an assignment. The word choice hung in the air between them, representing a fundamental shift in how Emma's existence within the program was being conceptualized. No longer simply an asset to be deployed, but an agent with legitimate input into her operational future. What choice? She asked finally. 2 paths forward, Lawrence explained. Continue with direct action operations, applying your extraordinary capabilities in increasingly complex environments. Or transition to a new role, training and developing the next generation of operators who will build on what you've pioneered. Emma considered these options with the same analytical thoroughness she applied to complex firing solutions. What about a third option? Continuing operational deployment but with greater autonomy in mission planning and execution? Applying not just my technical capabilities but the judgment I've developed through experience? Lawrence didn't hide his surprise at this counterproposal. That would represent a significant departure from program architecture. So did a 2,800-yard shot sequence that saved 4 operators from execution, Emma replied. Sometimes departure from established parameters is precisely what the mission requires. The conversation that followed marked the beginning of Emma Walsh's final evolution, not away from the extraordinary capabilities that had defined her operational life, but toward a new integration of those capabilities within a framework of autonomous agency. 6 months later, Emma stood on a windswept ridgeline in a classified training facility, observing as 3 women moved through precision shooting drills at ranges that would have seemed impossible by conventional standards. Each represented the next generation of the program, selected for the same specialized traits that had identified Emma 12 years earlier. But their training followed a different protocol, one that Emma herself had helped design. They were being developed not just as precision instruments but as complete operators capable of independent judgment, tactical innovation, and autonomous decision-making within complex environments. Their progress is impressive, Colonel Blackwood observed, joining Emma at her observation position. Especially their adaptability to changing conditions. Emma nodded, watching as the trainees adjusted their firing solutions to account for a sudden shift in wind patterns. They're learning to think beyond mechanical execution, to understand not just how to make the shot, but when, and why, and what it means beyond the immediate tactical objective. Your influence, Blackwood noted. You've transformed not just your own operational profile but the entire program architecture. The observation was accurate. While Emma continued to deploy for critical operations requiring her unique capabilities, she had also assumed responsibility for reshaping how those capabilities would be developed in future operators. The Ghost had not only emerged from the shadows but was now defining the nature of the shadows themselves. I've been authorized to brief you on an upcoming deployment, Blackwood continued. High-value target embedded in a complex urban environment. Conventional approaches deemed non-viable due to political constraints. Emma accepted the briefing materials, scanning the parameters with practiced efficiency. The shop profile is challenging but within capabilities. What's the strategic context? The question, once unthinkable from an operator whose focus had been exclusively technical, demonstrated how completely Emma's role had evolved. She was no longer simply receiving mission parameters but engaging with the broader context in which those parameters existed. The target represents a critical node in a terrorist financing network, Blackwood explained. His elimination will disrupt multiple operations across 3 continents. Emma continued reviewing the materials, analyzing not just technical requirements but strategic implications. I'll need 72 hours for environmental assessment before determining optimal approach. The urban terrain introduces variables that require direct observation. Authorized, Blackwood replied. You have operational discretion for planning and execution. The phrase, operational discretion, represented the culmination of Emma's evolution from precision instrument to autonomous agent. She would determine not just how to execute the mission but the specific parameters of that execution, applying her judgment to circumstances that could never be fully anticipated by mission planners. As Blackwood departed, Emma turned her attention back to the trainees on the firing range. They represented not just the program's future but a fundamental reconceptualization of what the program itself meant, not the development of perfect weapons but the cultivation of extraordinary capabilities within a framework of human judgment and autonomous agency. In that evolution lay the true legacy of Emma Walsh, not just the impossible shots that had saved lives and shaped conflicts, but the transformation of what it meant to possess such extraordinary capabilities in service to something beyond mechanical execution. The Ghost had not simply emerged from shadows but had redefined the very nature of the light, creating space for extraordinary human potential to exist in harmony with the autonomous agency that made that potential truly meaningful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.